Okay, so this is the payroll webinar for job cost. And I have a demo company up here on my computer. So under File, Payroll, Employees is where you enter and maintain employee information. Every employee has an employee ID, which has to be unique. You cannot have two of the same. If you use your binoculars, you can get to a lookup list. In the lookup list, you can type and seek as far as search for a certain name. So if I want to see names that start with Mary, I can type in an MA, and it'll take me as close as I can to that name. I can do that in each one of these columns. Wherever my focus is on my cursor focus, I can type in that column and sort by that column. I can also click on the column headings and sort in that order. Now you'll notice my employee IDs, they can be alpha, or they can be numeric, and they can be also a combination of alpha and numeric. So I can have different employee IDs. I can keep them in order alphabetically by using like last name, then first name, or first initials, or I can do a sequence of numbers. The first page of the employee information is the employee's personal information, like their address, their social security number, phone numbers, email addresses. If you use our direct deposit feature, this is where the email, when you email check stubs, that's where they pulls the email address from. Has their birth date, their marital status. If they work in a certain department, you can select that if you use departments. Page 2 of the employee file has their union information, if they're part of a union. It also has their pay rates, pay codes, pay periods. You can also set their regular hours a day and a week so that they work 8 hours a day. If they work over 8 hours a day, they get overtime. If they work over 40 hours a week, they can get overtime. So you can set those limits to make sure that they don't work over that hours, over 8 hours without getting overtime. State withholding, federal withholding, work comp codes. A lot of these fields, for example, if I'm entering a new employee and I want to go in to find out what the work comp code, I can hit an F12 and it'll bring up a list of available work comp codes. And then I can select from this list which work comp code I want to use. If you use direct deposit, down below here is the direct deposit information, where you would put in the transaction codes and the routing numbers for the employee's bank account. And they have an option for 2 different direct deposit banks, or 2 different accounts to be direct deposited into. This also keeps track of the last pay period, which is the last time that they were paid. And then also you can keep track of union statuses. If you have if they're on disability, you can keep track of their previous status, if they were active, and their current status, if they're on disability, or if they were previously on disability. You also have options here to, if the employee is FICA exempt, or if they're pension or veteran. Some of the new requirements for EEO reports for payroll require that you show if people are veterans or not. So we put in this option to check mark that box if he happens to be a veteran. The deductions tab is where their deductions are for state withholding. So most of your state withholding deductions, all of them will start with SWT dash and then the state name. This one is Illinois. The rest of these are all union deductions, and you can tell that because in the union ID there is a number. So it tells you which union the deduction is associated with. So he's got 3 different dues unions, 4 different dues deductions, but they're all from different unions. The state Illinois one does not have a union ID, so it's not a union deduction. Now you can also have on here child support deductions or loan deductions, anything that you want to deduct from his check. If I go to another employee, this guy does not have any. So here's some other deductions that he may have third-party sick pay, 401k. If you offer that at your company, that would be set up as a deduction. And it does not have a union ID because it's not union related. And health insurance is another option. Here is his state withholding tax for Illinois. Now, the union deductions, like I said, have the union ID. The amount column is 0, but there's a union amount column over here, which has the union deduction amount on there, which comes from the union file, which is an admin. These non-union deductions, the amount is put under this amount column or percentage. Now you can also set maximum amounts. So for example, if he got health insurance and you have a maximum of $7,000 a year that you want to withhold, and you're withholding, $200 a week, you would set the maximum to be where you want the deduction to stop at. So where you want it to stop taking it. So when this year-to-date amount equals the maximum amount, it will stop taking that deduction automatically. Accumulated shows you how much they've accumulated throughout the year so far. So you can see, okay, he's got a maximum of a certain amount. The accumulated should be a certain amount. It may be equal to the year-to-date amount, but it may not if it crosses over multiple years. So the accumulated will pull in the amount for multiple years so that you can see what he has accumulated to date so far from prior year and this year. The state withholding status is in this column here. And then you have a spot for exemptions and if they do any extra state withholding. Now the federal withholding status is on the page 2 screen, but the state is not here. The state is a deduction, so it's on the deduction screen. Quarterly total just gives you a recap by quarter of what their wages are for the year. The recap for wages for state withholding is in the deductions tab and the state withholding gross, year-to-date gross column. That shows you the wages for state for the year. That should match the quarterly total year-to-date wages of the $1,579, which it does. Year-to-date totals show you calendar year-to-date and fiscal year-to-date totals. If your fiscal year is the same as your calendar year, then these numbers should be the same. If your fiscal year is different than your calendar year, it ends in March or it ends in September, then these numbers would be different and would be just for the fiscal year totals, not the calendar year. If you have to provide a 1095-C form, this is the place where you would maintain that information. You can come into the employee, and if you check mark the print 1095-C, these boxes become active, and then you can put your offer codes in here. You would have to have a list of the offer codes that you use, because there are different ones to use. And if you put something in like all 12 months, it will go across all 12 months. I can put a dollar value in, and then I can put a safe harbor code, and it goes to all 12 months. Or I can select individually the amounts to put in here. Notes are just a note where you can enter notes for this employee. You can keep track of when they get raises or if they have change of addresses or any of that information. The notes also show here on the employee information tab, and they also show back here. User fields are different. You can track different information that we don't have a place to track on any of the other tabs. You can, for example, spouse's name, children, union level. You can track a start date. If these are guys that you hire and rehire, you can track multiple different start dates as when they started. If there's summer or seasonal help, you might want to track when they start in different years. You can also track different pay rates if you wish to say, he got this pay rate on this start date, and these could be a different start date with a different pay rate, what he started at that second time you hired. Signature, you could put a JPEG or a PNG file. It has to be some kind of picture file of a signature. It has to be 1 inch by 3.5 inches to fit in this box. And then the signature could be used on different forms as far as like purchase order. If they're a signature for the purchase order, it's possible to use it there. If they're a signature for certified payroll reports, it's possible to use it there as well. You would find you would click the browse button here, it would browse out to your computer. You would find your picture file and populate the path in here, and then it would show the signature. Employee history file shows you a history of your employees. So you would have, it's all the previous years that have already closed out. You would have a list of years here. If you use the drop-down arrow, you can see how far back your history goes for your employees. So if I wanted to look at last year's or 2 years ago's totals for an employee, I would select the year that I want and say OK, and then it's going to bring me up an employee list, and here it's going to show me year 2015. So it shows you what year you're in, and then you'll be able to see what their union ID was at the time, what their pay rates were, what their deductions were at the time, their quarterly totals for that year, their year-to-date totals also for that year. So this is basically a snapshot of what their employee file was at the end of 2015. Under time cards, it's where you enter time cards for the week to pay the employees. You need to click the plus key to enter a new time card. It will default to the last employee record, to the last employee ID that you did. If you can change that, or you can hit tab to select it. It also defaults from his employee file, the union that he was on. You can change that as well, or you can use the defaulted option. If you need to change that and you need to figure out what union you want to put him on, you could hit F12, and that will bring you to a list of your unions. And you can say, well, he worked in this union for this job or this day. Now, if you switch unions and they make different pay rates for his work class and work status, it will ask you if you want to change the pay rate from one to another. You have the option of selecting yes or no. Now, when you select yes, it turns these pay rates in red, because that means that you have made a change to what their defaulted pay rate normally is. So if you ever see it in red, that lets you know that you changed what their pay rate is normally to something else. Day of the week, if you hit F12 here, you have options of 1 through 7 for Sunday through Saturday. You also have options of bonus, commission, holiday, retroactive pay. Retroactive pay is union related. The time cards ignore the weekly limits. So if you have back pay that you need to pay someone, but the union only allows you to pay them so many hours a day, so many hours a week before they have to go into overtime, the retroactive pay will ignore those limits. So you could go ahead and put in 8 hours or 4 hours of retro pay to pay them for back pay without it affecting your union limits. The only problem with the retro pay option is that it does not show on a certified payroll report. So if the hours that or the wages that you need to make up for the employee is certified job related, you would not be able to use the retro pay option. You would then have to use either a day. You have to use one of the days of the week so that it shows up on the right day. But then the employee may have over their 8 hours a day, depending upon how many hours you have to adjust their pay for. The job, again, it will default to the last job that you used, and you can hit F12 to choose a new job. It'll bring up a job list, and you can search for the job that you want to put it on. Same with the phase. I can hit an F12 in the phase, and it will bring up a phase list for that job, and I can select the proper phase. The GL account ID, work class, work status, work comp code all default from the employee file. You can change those if you need to, but normally you just use what is defaulted. The SWT state and SUT state also default from the employee file. If you work in multiple states and this employee has worked in a different state for this particular time card, you would need to manually change these to be the correct state. Otherwise, it's going to calculate state withholding wages and SUT wages or SUT liability for the state that's listed here. So it always reads the time card first, regardless of what's on the employee file. So if I were to change this to Wisconsin, it would calculate Wisconsin state withholding tax and Wisconsin SUT liability, regardless of what's in their employee file. If you use local tax, which Indiana has local county taxes, and a few other states do too, that is something that would be set up in the tax table. And then if you did an F12 here, it would show you any local county tax that is out there. I don't have any in this company. So you would put that here, and then it would also calculate the local county tax because it's an additional percentage based on whatever county that you live in or that you're working in. You would put in their regular hours, which is then does the math and does the calculation, shows you for the week how many hours they have so far, if they worked overtime, double time. Taxable amount, if you wanted to enter a taxable amount versus a hourly rate because you want to reimburse them for, maybe they bought tools on their own and you need to reimburse them, or you need to reimburse them for tolls or travel, you can enter a taxable amount here. And it would then tax them, or it would reimburse them that taxable amount. If it was a non-taxable amount and you didn't want to tax them, but you wanted to reimburse them for something that was non-taxable, you can't do that on a regular time card. So if I wanted to do that, I would have to change my day of the week to be N, which is a non-tax option. So that means I'm entering a non-taxable time card. It's going to prompt me for a beginning and ending start and end date. And now I can't get into any of these other fields. The only thing I can get into is the non-tax amount field. So then I would put the non-tax amount that I want to reimburse them for. This code is just a miscellaneous code list. If I have expenses set up, I can say it's, mileage reimbursement, miscellaneous job material. I can, whatever I had set up as an expense, I can put that in the code so that I know what it's for. And then save and add would just save this time card, and then start up another one. So save and add just goes and starts a new time card defaulting to what I was on my previous one. If I don't want to add a new one, I can just hit the undo button. If I want to delete a time card and I don't have a check number against it, I can hit the purple minus key, and that would just delete it. Asks me if I want to delete this time card, and I say yes, and then that time card is gone. Now, if I have a check calculated on here, it would show the check number right here. and I would be able to see overhead here. When you calculate a check, it goes ahead and figures up overhead for the taxes, the workers' comp, the union fringes. And if you have miscellaneous overhead 1 and 2, it would show that as well. If when I come into time cards, I want to start a new week, I can click here. Let's say my week is, start a week dated today. Right? And if I say OK here, it's going to tell me that the pay period does not exist. Do I want to create it? And I can say yes. And then it's going to ask me the accounting month and year. I can verify the check quarter. And the check quarter, I can change that if I decide that I want it in a different quarter. But it's going to default to whatever quarter the accounting month and year should be in, and then the check year as well. Now, the only time that you have to decide what accounting month and year you want to put it in is at the end of the month. So if, for example, my payroll ends on Saturday, the 28th of October, but I'm not paying it till Friday, November 3rd, I have to decide, do I want to post it into October or do I want to post it into November, because November is when my check date is. Here is where you could change that. I could change this from posting into October simply by highlighting it and changing it to 11. And then I could change what it posts into. Time cards on grid are another way to enter time cards. What this basically does is shows you one line item per time card. It doesn't show you as much information as the other time card screen does, but it does allow you to enter default information up here on this top line. So for example, if I have a day code of Monday and I have a bunch of employees that worked Monday at a certain job, and for a certain phase, I can do as much or as little as I want. And let's say they all even worked 8 hours. So I have a whole crew of guys that work there. So when I hit the plus key to do a new time card, my day code, my job ID, my phase ID, my hours all default in to what I have up here. And now I just have to go in and put in the employee. And I can do an F12, and I can say Abraham Lincoln worked on this job. And then I don't have to, it defaults as union. I don't have to enter any of the other stuff in here. I've already defaulted it in there. And I can hit the plus key, and yes. I'm not sure why it's asking that. And then I can do another employee. And so it will default anything that I put up in here. I can put as much or as little information as I want. Or I can just, not have anything in here. And not default this. And then I can add a new time card. And I can manually put in the information. This does not have a save and add button, so you have to save it and then do the plus key to go down to the next line. But it will give you, it will show you what you've done on a one line per basis. It does give you some information, like here are their rates over here. So you can't see it all on one screen at the same time, but it will give you basically the same information, just in a different order. So I am going to say No to save that. We do have options to import time cards. There are, the standard import is just an Excel file that we have templates for that we can send to you, and shows you what order to put the Excel sheet in. And then it will import by using this option. You would go out and you would find the Excel file by browsing to your computer, find what the Excel file that you want, and then populate it in here for whatever pay period. You can change the pay period date here if you're doing it for the next week. It also gives you the option to ignore the first row. If you have column headings on your first row of your Excel file, you can click the box to ignore that. Calculate checks is an option for when you're done entering your time cards and you want to produce your checks. When you calculate that, it defaults to the pay period, the first pay period that has uncalculated checks in it. Because this is a demo company data, it does not have all the updated information. So I can do it for a certain employee range by putting a beginning and ending employee. Again, I can hit F12 here, and it gives me a list of my employees. So I can say that I just want to do it for one certain guy, if that's what I want to do. Most of the time, though, you're going to do it for everybody that has a time card. I can calculate just for a certain day if I wish to, but most of the time you're going to let it default to all. These are options to not calculate taxes or 401ks or 125s. So like if you're giving bonus checks and you don't want the 401k to be calculated on the bonus check or the 125, you can uncheck those. You can also uncheck other deductions. So for example, on bonus checks, again, you wouldn't want child support to be deducted for a second time for the week, or maybe, they've got some kind of loan or other union deductions that you don't want to have calculated. If you are using direct deposit and this check you need to give the employee, it has to be a paper check, or you want to give him a paper check, you would put his beginning and ending employee ID in, and then you could use the option to create paper checks only. Now, if you check mark that option and you say OK, it gives you this warning that you have selected to create paper checks only, overrides the direct deposit feature, calculates a paper check. Do you want to continue? Just say yes at that point if that's what you wanted to do. In this case, we're going to not check that, and we are going to say OK. And it went ahead and it calculated. It says calculation complete. Now, if I go back to my time card screen for this week, I can see that my check number has now filled in with a T check, and that is the temporary check that the Calculate creates. I can also see that the overhead, if I click on my overhead button, now I have all my overheads that have triggered in. And I can see what the total cost of my wages are going to be for this particular time card. Now I can go into Review Void Checks, and I can look at my check records if I wish to see what the employees have made, or if I need to make changes, if I need to adjust some of the amount. If you use binoculars, I can see all the different employees that have checks in this week. And I can choose to look at one of the other checks if I need to make sure that something calculated properly or if the deductions came out the right way. I can also run in reports, payroll, there is a time card edit report, and I can run that for the week to the screen, and I can see, make sure that I verify that all my time cards are entered correctly and that they have the correct jobs and phases on them. I can also run a pre-check register after I've calculated for this week, so I can see what my checks are going to turn out to look like. I can see the deductions that I've taken out, make sure that I have the right amounts. I can see the net pay, what they're going to get. Is somebody making a lot of money? For example, this one looks a little goofy, but things like that you would want to look at. So why is this guy making so much money this week? And then I would go look at his time card, and I could see on his time card, most likely, that look up his time cards. So I gave him 8 hours at $2,000 instead of 1 hour. So that was something that I would want to correct because he's obviously a salaried employee and he doesn't make $2,000 an hour. But I can't make this change here now because I got a check attached to it, so it's not going to let me change the time card. So I have to go into Review Void Checks. I have to use my binoculars and look up his check, and then I want to delete his check using the purple minus key. After I've deleted his check, I can exit, go back to my time card for that week, use my binoculars to look him up, bring him up, and then now I can change this to be 1 at 2,000. And then if I want to recalculate, let's say I just want to do him because I don't want to change anybody else, I can type in his name, and it will just calculate him. Now if I go back to my reports and I run my check, pre-check register, oops, I get the right date. Now I can look and see, okay, that looks more normal. That's what I wanted to pay him. Once I verified that everything's correct, you'd go into File, Payroll, Print Checks, and change my pay period date. Normally it would default to your current pay period date that has unprinted checks. So you normally would not have to change that. Defaults to whatever your cash general ledger account number is in the admin payroll control table. It also defaults your beginning check number to the last check number that was used on this account. You can change this number if you use different check numbers for direct deposit. A lot of people have a different series of check numbers for your direct deposit checks from your regular checks. And that's what we recommend, that you print your direct deposit checks to a different check number series. So if I have direct deposit, in this case, I would want to say, all right, I'm going to print my regular checks, because I have some guys that do paper checks, and I'm going to leave my check number default to whatever my beginning check number is here. When I do my direct deposit checks, I'm going to come in and print direct deposit checks, but I'm going to change my check number to be something different. So for example, if I wanted to use, like 2017, and I want to start with 1001, and then it's going to go up 1002, 3, 4, 5, and I can keep track of that. I can look at my post-check register every week, and I can say, what was my last check number that I used for my direct deposit people? It will show me the check number, then the following, and I'll change this to be the new number. So let's say I ended on 15. The next week I would come in here and change it to be 16. Because it only remembers one series of check numbers for this beginning check number field. It's not going to remember two separate series, so you have to watch that when you're using both direct deposit and regular checks so that the check number is accurate when you go to print. They can be changed, but you just want to make sure that it's accurate at the time. So it's going to go through and it's going to show you the check to the screen. Because this is a direct deposit check, it's going to be void, and that's normal because it's not a live check. So it's just basically getting check stub information for the employee. And the face of the check is voided. It's not a cashable check. When you're done printing the checks, it's going to ask you, did checks print correctly? If you say yes, it records the check numbers and records the check. If you say no, it does not record the check numbers and does not record the checks. So we always recommend that you wait to answer this question until all of the checks have processed. If you're doing direct deposit checks like I am, it's not going to process checks through a printer, so some people probably will say yes right away. But if you used the wrong check number and you realize it prior to answering this question and you say no, it will not record that check number. It will put it back to being a temporary check number. So that would be one way to prevent or to correct the problem of printing the wrong check numbers by saying no to this if you realize it at the time. So in this case, I'm just going to say yes, that it is correct. And now if I look at my time cards for this week, my one direct deposit guy has a check number, a real live check number. And if I look, I still have my other two guys are temporary checks still. So then I would go in and print checks one more time. And I would say I want to do regular checks, but I don't want to use this number because that's my direct deposit numbers. So I want to change this to 1082, which is what my next real live check number is. And I say okay, then it produces that check. The face of the check has the dollar amount printed out so that it is a cashable check. And then I can say yes, check's printed correctly. After you have printed checks, you can go to Reports, Payroll, Check, and run the post-check register. This also creates the direct deposit file if you use our direct deposit feature. Creating text is what creates the direct deposit uploadable file. You say both, it will create the text and the direct deposit file and give you the report. So here is the report that it gives you, and it's basically like the pre-check, only it's got check numbers on it and shows you what the check numbers are. It also gives you your federal tax summary for your tax payment, your tax deposit payment. So it shows you the federal withholding, Social Security, Medicare, shows you what your total is for the week, gives you your state information as well, shows you what your state total is for the week, what you owe for the state of Illinois. Gives you your total net amount of checks that you paid out, number of checks to be printed. Also shows you a breakdown of hours and wages, shows you year-to-date totals as far as what your year-to-date amounts are for your deductions. These here are your deductions. So it shows you for the period what deductions you've done, and then it shows you year-to-date the deductions. Next thing it's going to tell me is my text file has been created. And there is a direct deposit file that gets created out there, and it's stored wherever your payroll directory is in your admin payroll control section. If you use the direct deposit feature, the next step would be to email direct deposit to employees. And it defaults to the current period ending date. You could either do it on a per employee basis, or if you just want to send everything, you would just say okay. It would populate your direct deposit email with your direct deposit check stub attached for the employees. They do have to have an email address on their employee file in order for it to send them the email. Positive Pay is a feature that we have to help prevent bank fraud, where your bank waits to get this file from you. It's a text file that it creates. So this is a separate text file from the direct deposit file, but it gives a listing of checks that you created for this pay period. And you send that to the bank and say, these are the checks that I authorize or that we authorize to be processed through the bank for this pay period. So then your bank will not cash or process any other checks except for the ones that are in this file. So a lot of our customers use this to prevent fraud so that somebody gets a hold of your checks. They can't just write themselves a check without your prior authorization, which is what this does. Posting is when you close out the week for payroll. We have posting to general ledger, posting to job cost. If you use equipment, you post equipment to the ledger. Checks to the employee file, so it updates the employee's year-to-date totals when you post. So once you run a check, it doesn't update the year-to-dates on the employee file until you've actually run this posting checks to employees step. Create AP invoices from payroll is an option where if you have child support and you need to pay it then to a third party after you've withheld it from the employee, if you have a vendor on your child support deduction, a vendor ID, it will automatically create the AP invoice so that you can just go in and select the invoice to pay that third party person for the child support payment that you deducted. 1095 import is a way to import the 1095-C from an Excel file into the employee file screen. Under reports, payroll, you have an employee list, just gives you a list of employees. You have a union list, which gives you a list of your unions. Your time card edit is what you run to verify that the time cards you entered are correct. Under check, you have your pre-check and your post-check. The check ledger could be run just a listing of checks for a certain time frame or a certain quarter. So if you want to see what you've done in the first quarter, you could go to the screen, and there's nothing in the first quarter for this company, but there we go. So it gives you then a check ledger, show you the checks that you have paid the employees for that quarter. Weekly reports are the same as the posting reports, but it's a way to run it without posting anything. So you could look at the weekly reports, and it doesn't actually post anything. It just runs the report for you. When you go under File, Payroll, Post, those actually do the posting steps where it posted into GL and posted into job cost. The weekly also is where you would print your certified reports, or you have the option to email certified reports. So if you're printing certified reports, it's just going to come up and ask you what pay period date you're printing it for. It's going to default to the last pay period that's been closed, or whatever your current pay period week is. You can print it just for one job, or you can do it for all jobs by not putting anything in that field. You can do it just for one certified report at a time if you want to. Otherwise, it's going to automatically go through each certified report and print it for you. So if you want certain boxes checked, you could check mark it here. They could go to the screen. It's going to go through each report and say there's nothing to print for this particular form. And then it's going to print. This one is, I believe, the WH-347, which has the Social Security and address hidden. So I can go through and look at the report for those. Nothing to print for that version, nothing to print for that version. Goes through and it goes, we have the City of Chicago one, the Department of Housing. And then this is the LCP tracker, where it's going to try to create a LCP tracker file, an Excel file for the LCP tracker upload. So I can overwrite that if I want to, because it already exists in this company. Normally, it would just go ahead and create it. I'm going to say no in this case. Emailing certified kind of does the same thing, except you have to have an email address on the job file on page 2 in the certified section in order for the email to the reports to be emailed to the client versus printed. Your monthly reports would be your union reports, your workers' comp, your 401k deduction, your EEO reports. We do have a monthly certified that is not as widely used. It just gives a brief monthly summary of that. Local tax report, if you use local tax, and then the Illinois Department of Employment monthly SUT upload. Because now you have to report that monthly. So then we have a uploadable or report that runs that's uploadable, and it's basically going to give you the report and the text. And the text file that it creates is what you're going to go upload to the MyTax website. Quarterly reports, you have the 941 federal, which is basically looks just like the federal form. It'll give you the Schedule B. Basically, this is the numbers on the Schedule B. It gives you the option to change the amounts here on this screen if you need to adjust any of these totals. Then if you get this message, you need to call us and let us know that there's a problem with your payroll, and we need to research why. This just gives you a listing of the employees, their wages, and what the amounts are at the 6.2% that you would owe. Then it comes up with the 941 quarterly return, which is a return that looks exactly like the form that the government supplies. This form is not supposed to be fileable to the federal government, even though it looks like it could be. And then the last page of it is the Schedule B. Now, you can't click in here and change any of these, but that very first option where it came up with those 3 months, that's where you would change these numbers if you need to for some reason. We've also developed the 941 Illinois form, because Illinois has required now that you file a 941 form with them. Again, you have this section where you can change the amount of liability that you paid in for the month, or you can leave it default to what was actually there. And then it comes up with the 941 return with the numbers in there, your payroll system. This is your state withholding quarterly report, your federal unemployment tax, your state unemployment tax. Now for state unemployment, if you're using the new MyTax website, you can create a text file here, and it will create a file that is uploadable to file for your quarterly reports. We recently had to make changes because Illinois switched from using TaxNet to MyTax. So we recently had to make changes to this text file so that MyTax will accept it. If you have not received those changes yet and you want them, that will require an update, and we can schedule that for you. You just call the office and ask about it. And then this is, again, a check ledger, which is the same check ledger, just another place to run it from. At the end of the year, you have your fiscal year to date. When your fiscal year ends, after you close the last week of your fiscal year, whether it be December or September or March, you need to run the fiscal year to date reports. You also need to make sure that you zero the fiscal year to date totals at the end of your fiscal year before you do payroll for the new year, especially if it's not on a calendar year basis. If you're doing it, at a different time during the year, then you need to make sure that those steps are done. Otherwise, your fiscal year to date totals will not be accurate. Calendar year to date, these are the calendar reports that you would run. These are our year-end reports. You have the 941, the SUT, FUT, all your same quarterlies, your W-2 totals, W-2 forms. W-2 electronic filing creates an electronic file to be uploaded to the government for submission of your W-2s. This is also where you create the 1095 forms. Miscellaneous deduction is a report that will give you a list of deductions that you've withheld for a certain pay period or a certain employee. So if you're trying to see how many child support payments did I withhold from him, or how many insurance payments have been withheld, you can run this deduction report for a certain employee, a certain pay period, and it would give you a list of deduction codes, the employee, what period ending date, what check number they were taken out on. Admin payroll controls, this is basically set up for you before, when you first set up with our system, and you don't normally have to come here and change too many things. If you do submit electronic W-2s, this information here has to be filled in. Otherwise, the file will error when you try to upload it, or it will actually error when you try to run it, because it will say that this information is required. Time card tab is where you can select where you want the time card program to stop at. So when you tab through the time card entry screen, what do you want it to ask? Do you want it to always stop at workers' comp code? If so, you would check that. Do you want it to always stop at overtime hours or double time hours? If you don't want it to stop at double time hours when you tab through, then you can uncheck that and it won't stop at double time hours anymore. Do you want it to always stop at taxable amount as you're tabbing through the screen? If you don't, then you would uncheck that. These options down here are basically set, and not necessary to come in here and change them at all. They would be set up as when you first set up with our software. Certified reports, this is another place where you would put the signatory name and title to show on the certified. You could also stick the signature back here for the certified, for this John Chandler, he would be his signature here. Again, it has to be a picture PNG file or a JPEG file, and it has to be 1/2 inch by 2.5 inches to fit properly on the form. Page 4 is where you could set up your 401k, match, and company contribution. This is also where you set up your direct deposit information. So this would be your bank's information, your company's bank's information. So your company's routing number, the company's bank name, and account number, and company ID. This is also where you can select where your expenses are posted to. Most of the time it's general ledger and job cost, but you do have sometimes options if you don't do job costing, you just want it to go to general ledger. Or for example, if you don't want certain expenses to post to general ledger, you just want job cost. So those are your 3 options basically for these expenses. Credit account numbers is the credit side of where all of your liability for payroll is going to post to. The only thing you normally would need to change in here is this cash payroll account number. If you switch banks and you're going to a new bank, you have to set up a new general ledger account number for that new bank, and you want that general ledger account number to default when you print checks, and you would come in here and change it because it's going to default to whatever's listed here when you go to print checks. If you use the other 1 and other 2 overhead options, this is an option to add additional overhead to your jobs and to your general ledger if you want, or it could just be jobs if you want to add extra overhead to your jobs. You would then choose, do you want to add an extra percentage, or do you want to add an hourly rate? So I want $5 more an hour to go to as overhead on my jobs to account for payroll liabilities, like as far as insurance that's not workers' comp, because workers' comp already calculates, but you might have liability insurance that is not calculating. You might have fuel expenses that you want to figure in here. So you can either increase it by a percentage or by an hourly rate. And no, I don't want to save changes. Debit accounts. You have to have a debit account to use on the time cards. So the GL account ID that you use on time cards has to exist in this debit account table. So if I use my binoculars here, you'll see I've got different account numbers here. This one is job cost labor. I can also use my arrow keys, and I can say that this one is supervisor. This also tells the debit side of all the payroll liabilities as to where it's going to go to, where it posts to. Deductions is where my union deductions go, my add-ons, any union add-ons, any union fringes, any taxes. They're all stored in these deductions table here. Now, if I use binoculars, I can see a list of my different deductions. The deduction IDs can be numeric, can be alphanumeric. I can have it coincide with a union number if I want to. I can do NECA, my different NECA benefits. Here's some couple different state withholdings. So all your state withholdings, if you use local taxes, your local taxes would have to be set up in here. Anything that comes out of your payroll checks is going to basically be set up in here. Any fringes, any pensions, anything, health insurance deductions, telephone deductions, anything that you're going to deduct is going to come off, is going to be set up on this in this deduction table. Tax tables are where you maintain your federal and state tax tables. At the end of the year, we'll send you information on how to update these tax tables and what the correct current new rates would be for the year of 2018. It has your standard exemptions, your Social Security, Medicare's. This is also where you can set your vendor IDs for taxes if you want the option of automatically creating those AP invoices for your tax payments. You can set a vendor ID here and it will automatically populate that. If you're single and you're married tab. Now on the deductions here, this vendor ID column right here is where, like I said before, if you have child support and you want to create an AP invoice automatically for whomever you're paying that child support to, you would put that vendor ID in here. And that would, the child support would then would be created automatically, the invoice for AP. The tax table state, because we have customers that work in multiple states, we have all the states listed, so you have to use your binoculars in order to find the proper state. You would go to Illinois, and this is where you would set what your Illinois percentage is. The single and the married tab is what holds the percentage that you're going to withhold from the employee's checks. The rest of this information is, this exemption is also gets set. The SUT percentage is something that gets set. The government will send you a letter, usually, letting you know what your percentage will be for the following year. And then at the end of the year, you would come in and update to whatever that letter shows you. This is not something that we provide you with, because every company is different. When you build a new time card file, you create a new time card header each week. Under Admin Payroll, time card header is where the time card headers are stored. When you go in there the first time, it will be a really old date depending upon how long you've been in our system. You can use your binoculars and you can see a list of all of the dates. If you hit the N key on your keyboard, it'll take you down to the bottom. This is where you would have the option, if you built the time card header and you realized it was in the wrong accounting month and year, or in the wrong check quarter, or the wrong check year for some reason, you could come in here and change it as long as you have not posted the week yet. So for example, this week is not posted, and I can tell that because all of my backgrounds here are white. Excuse me. So I have the options to go in here and change them. Now if I go back a week, so this one, all my backgrounds are gray because this week has been posted. And I can tell also by the check marks here, I'm posted, my posted flags. If I go forward a week, these are all white because this has not been posted yet. So then I can still make changes to this time card header file here, and I could change that to a different counting period if I wanted to, or a different quarter if I chose the wrong one at the time I created the file. Union pay rate table is where you enter and maintain your unions. this is kind of a large table where you might have a lot of unions set up in here. You would basically have your union ID here, the name of the union, address, any add-ons. If the union had add-ons, you would enter an add-on. Now, the add-on would have to be set up as a deduction code. So if I'm going to add an add-on and I click the plus key, it's going to come here. If I hit an F12, it's going to bring up my deductions from the deductions, add-ons, fringes, and taxes table. So it has to exist there before I can use it here. Same with these deductions, they have to exist on that table. And then I can set what type I'm going to use. And my choices are either going to be an amount, an hourly fixed, which means that no matter what hours they work, it's going to be at this particular rate. Hourly variable means if they work overtime or double time, the rate is going to increase by time and a half for overtime and double time for double time. And then percentages before or after add-ons. So if it has add-ons and it's percent before add-ons, then it's going to take a percentage before it calculates the add-on. Or if it's after, it's going to take the percentage after it calculates the add-on. Your frequency would be, is it doing it every pay period, or which pay period would you like it to do it? And then the amount is either going to be percent if you have this set to percent, or hourly if you have it set to hourly. Fringes are the fringes that you are going to pay in to the union for these employees and the rates. Again, you set the type and the frequency, and you set the amount based on what the union sends you on a yearly basis. You have to come in here and update these when the union updates their benefits. Rates would be the pay rate for this work class and work status. So you have work classes and statuses set up, and you can add to them, but you would choose whatever work class and work status that they are, and then enter the associated pay rate. And then when you enter an employee to this union, to this work class, and this work status, it's going to come out here and look for this pay rate and default it onto the employee file. Also, when you come in here and you want to, the union has updated their wages and they increase their pay rate, and let's say I need to change this to $35.75. When I go to save it, it's going to ask me, do I want to change all employees with this pay rate? So what this will do is go to the employee file, look for anybody in this union with this work class and this work status, and increase their pay rate to the amount that I selected here. Okay, so I'm going to say no. I'm going to put this back to what it was. It's going to ask me that again, and I'm going to say no again in this case. But normally you would say yes if you wanted to update all the employees automatically. Unpost if you have to reopen a week of payroll. For example, you have to correct somebody got the wrong hours on a certified job, or they didn't get put onto a certified job and they should have. And you need to correct that in the week that they actually worked so that it shows properly. You could come in here and you could reopen that payroll week, make your corrections, and then reclose it. Now, you can reopen a prior week as long as it's in the same year. So you don't have to reopen every week back like you do in all the other modules, but you can go back to a week in, let's say, August and reopen it to fix something without unposting all of September and October in payroll, as long you can't go back to last year, but you can go back to a prior week in the same year. Your listing of work classes. I use binoculars. A lot of these are preset in. You can add new ones if you have a work class, or you can change the names of these if you want it called something else. This is where you can also set the EEE job category or EEO job categories for if you use the EEO reports. Work status is the same thing, has different work statuses. You can, again, adjust these names to be whatever works for your company, or add something new if you have some other work statuses that you would use. workers' comp codes. Every year your workers' comp policy updates, and you need to come back here and change the percentages to match whatever is on your new workers' comp code or workers' comp policy. So you have a list of codes here by using binoculars. You can see your listing of codes. So you would go code by code and update the percentage. If you need to add new ones, then you would add new ones here by hitting the plus key. But you would come through each one and put the correct percentage in based on your new policies for the year. You can have multiple states, workers' comp codes for multiple states. This one is Virginia. So it can be, you can have any state that you work in, you can have a workers' comp code in here. When you do enter a new workers' comp code, it has to start with the 2-digit state name, like VA for Virginia, or IL for Illinois, or if it's Indiana, it has to start with IN. That is a required code that you have to start with the state initially. Year end is part of the year end step when it's the end of the calendar year and you're ready to start the new year of payroll. You would do the backup and zero the employee file. And once that is done, it's something that cannot be undone. So we give you instructions on that for at the end of the year. And we just caution you to be careful doing that. If it's the end of your fiscal year, this is where you could zero these fiscal year employee totals. That, like I said before, you need to make sure that you do that on a timely basis, because if your fiscal year ends in a month other than the calendar year, you need to make sure you do it at the end of September or the end of March before you process payroll for the following month. Do we have anything else here that I forgot? No, I believe that is all that I can think of at this time to tell you. That's all there is. If you guys have any questions, I can take questions at this time. If anybody has any questions about anything. If not, you can always call the office and ask for questions. And thank you for attending the webinar today. And like I said, if you have any questions, just give us a call.